Hello, YouTube world. I'm so glad you are here for another adventure with StoneCabinAdventures. Today's adventure features Pinky Calhoun. Life and Times of Pinky Calhoun, Chapter 11, Episode 15. The Fish. I made a perfect 100 on my spelling test. Again. And on my arithmetic test. And on my history and geography papers. We all made A's in music and drawing. Even the kids who drew where you couldn't even tell what it was made A's in drawing. And it didn't matter how bad we sang, we all got A's in music. I barely passed penmanship. I worked hard at it. I didn't have to work at my other schoolwork. If Mrs. Harkin hadn't liked me, I'd have flunked penmanship for sure. Sometimes I almost hate Emily. I wished so hard I could write pretty. I don't know how Emmy makes such perfect letters. Even knowing how fruitless envying her was. I frowned at the chicken scratches on my own paper. Emily nudged me and pointed out the window. I forgot all about pretty letters when I saw our wagon going past and disappearing out of sight. I looked at Emmy and looked out the window again. Mrs. Harkin cleared her throat. I glanced her way. Since she was looking at me, I raised my hand. She sighed loud. What is it this time? May I be excused to visit the necessary house? She closed her eyes. I knew she would let me, but it would cost me later. She had to know something out the window captured my attention. I wanted to know why Ma or Pa had driven our wagon into town. It would be worth any consequence that Miss Harkin could dream up. Mrs. Harkin's meanest day ever was nicer than anybody else's. Until she had to protect me, then she got downright serious. Please, now? Yes, go. She turned back to the blackboard and began squawking the chalk about a man named Dickens who wrote about poor people in England. I thought we fought a war so we didn't have to worry about England. If Dickens had his way, everywhere would be England so he could write about us all. I walked out the door and around the corner to the privy. I still couldn't run right because my knee needed more healing time, but I could walk okay and sort of half skip. I hurried past the outhouse and toward our wagon. By the time I got there, a crowd had gathered. I couldn't get close to the back of the wagon. I walked up between our horses. Pa seen me and pulled me out of there and plunked me on the wagon seat. I turned and looked and almost choked. Most of a dead fish lay in the wagon. A huge dead fish. Ma's monster had been big, but this fish, his head was a hand wider. One of Pa's hands wider than Ma's fish's head. Mr. Gosling, the blacksmith, grabbed hold of me and pulled me out of the wagon. He held me against his smoky clothes and danced around like he had lost his mind. He smelled like hot iron and old sweat. His breath smelled like peppermint and fresh bread. I liked that. Mr. Kruger's breath smelled like he ate dead stuff. It made me gag. You did it. You really did it. Mr. Gosling danced sillier and crazier every second. He sang about Pinky and the Big Fish, making up words and melody as he went. He kicked up one foot high in the air and then the other one. And he added, she caught that fish on a hook I made, after every other line. He spun in circles, kicking like crazy, till I thought I'd puke from dizziness. I wondered why he sang about me like I wasn't there. I tried to get Pa's attention so he'd have Mr. Gosling put me where I could see the fish better. Mr. Gosling cavorted around like Buddy Bacon after too much sour mash. I had to settle for the bits and pieces I could hear. Mr. Gosling tossed me high over the wagon to Mr. Kruger so he could poke at that dead fish. Emmy's paw nearly dropped me. He banged my head on the side of the wagon. Several people chided him about not being careful with little girls. I supposed it would have been okay with them if he had just plumb dropped me if I'd been a little boy. Everyone wanted to catch a big fish of their own. They kept asking me how I knew about this one. They asked questions on top of questions. I was willing to settle for being the only one to catch one this big. Almost willing. I wanted to catch my monster fish. Mr. Kruger's breath still smelled like he ate dead stuff, so I asked him to put me down. He dropped me like a hot rock. Since folks kept asking about catching that fish, I had to tell them. They thought they wanted to know everything. These people probably didn't want to know that I'd seen their sons skinny dipping, and I sure enough didn't want the boys to know that I'd watched their fun. I climbed in the wagon to be taller. I also took a moment to make sure my audience listened. I started with the story of having to climb the tree to get the rope without a word about how I knew that rope was there. This may be a big fish, but it isn't the one that near ate me. I can't fit in this one's mouth. I could have got my head and shoulders in its mouth. I didn't want to try. This fish had been dead a while. Its eyes had turned white. Well, Pinky, we'll just have to try again. What did you say you used for bait? Pa asked the question like he didn't already know. I winked at Pa. I sure enough never told anyone about my secret bait. That's my girl. He grinned so big I thought his face would crack. What do you mean this isn't the big one you were after? Besides, if you fit in that other fish's mouth, how come it didn't eat you? I ignored some of the stupider comments and questions. Governor Pitkin would have been proud of me. Well, this is a big fish. Well, rather, it was when it was alive. Part of it already got ate by turtles or something. You can see how big it must have been because how big it is from eye to eye. The one I'm aiming to catch has a bigger mouth. It could swallow my brother Elmer or Adam Kruger or even Billy Joe without a hiccup. I could tell by their expressions that nobody believed me. And I didn't much care whether they believed me or not. Well, not much anyhow. Billy Joe straightened out one of the whiskers. It was longer than Pa's boots. You gotta take me with you when you go after the big one. Billy Joe knew I'd take him along and gladly, but I didn't make any promises out loud. I worried no one would vote for me for governor or even the mayor if they thought I was a liar. Even with a river monster laying right there in front of them as proof, they couldn't believe it. I had to do what Governor Pitkin called electioneering. You can call me a liar if you want, but if I'd told you yesterday about this fish, you wouldn't have believed me about this one either. When I run for mayor, you better remember about all the big fish I catch. That way you'll know I tell the truth. You didn't catch it, your pa did. Well, you're half right. I baited the hooks and threw the line out, but Pa pulled it in. It's my hook. Mr. Gosling made it for me. The blacksmith winked at me when I said that. I'll bet if you pay him enough, he might make you one too. What gave you the stupid idea that girls can be the mayor? One of the men who had pushed his way to the front wore a big yellow mustache with curls on the ends. His wife was a skinny little chicken woman. I felt sorry for her. He was meaner than anyone needed to be. He glared at me like I'd been caught stealing from the church. I decided I didn't want people like him voting for me. I'd rather he didn't like me. But to get elected, I couldn't say that out loud. The governor talked to me about watching my mouth. He said, think what you want, say what you must. Never say anything you don't mean, and don't say anything mean. I tried to explain without sounding uppity. Governor Pitkin and I talked about it. He said towns could make any rules they wanted. If I want to be governor or senator or something, the state would have to make a law that said girls could have that job. I climbed back down on the ground. I nearly stepped in a pile of horse poop. I danced to one side. Oh, the governor told you that, did he? Pa stepped closer to the mustache man and said, yes, he did. Governor Pitkin spent a couple of evenings at our house while he was here. He and Pinky talked quite a bit about what she'd need to do if she wanted to run for office. He recommended that she go to Denver to watch the state legislature in action. Mrs. Calhoun and I are planning to take the children when they vote to determine where the permanent state capital will be. And why would the governor have stepped foot in your house? I wondered what mean bug had bit Mr. Mustache to make him so hateful. I smiled when I remembered how important I felt when the governor of Colorado took time from his schedule to talk to me like I mattered. We sat long at the table after breakfast, just him and me, and drank coffee and talked politics. He asked me more questions than I imagined a governor would need to know. And then, after supper, we talked again. Pa smiled and motioned for me to move closer to him. I climbed into the wagon and stepped over that dead fish to get close to Pa. He's a relative, Pinky comes by it honest. He climbed on the wagon seat and hugged me up next to him. I heard Billy Joe's voice. The governor's smart. He knows Miss Calhoun is the best cook in the county. Sure enough, I eat there every chance I get. Pa squeezed me tight again and announced, let's go rebait your hook and catch the big one. I figured half a dozen men would follow us home, so I said, let's dump this stinky one out for Bacon Boy and Fatty first. I didn't figure anyone wanted to help get that dead fish out of the wagon. I showed it to your ma. She says we should put the head on the side of the barn, even if it was dead by the time we pulled it in. Do you think its bubble will be any good? We'll see, Pinky, we'll see. I doubt it, but we'll check. He flicked the reins and we headed home. I wondered the whole way there how much trouble I'd be in when Pa realized I skipped school. The next day I had to print the whole alphabet 10 times. I hurried and she made me do it again. It did not help my penmanship at all. Thank you so much for listening. Like, subscribe, ring the notification bell, and most importantly, share or write comments. I love to read those comments. I don't always get on Kevin's computer when I'm clicking them, and he can make hearts on them on his computer. On my computer, I can just click the like button. So, I do appreciate every comment, and I hope you all love Pinky as much as I do. Y'all have a blessed evening, and remember, Jesus loves you, and so do we. Mwah.